Previously on Wentworth. Chrissy Latham was charged with her sister's murder, and Chrissy tried to attack Craven in the dining room in front of everyone. When Craven tried to have her slotted, Will undermined Craven and started playing a dangerous game. Rita and Sandy worked together to get a loaded gun into Wentworth, but the gun ended up going missing, much to Rita's panic. Rita has also instructed the Conquerors to burn down Craven's house and to make sure that he knows that she sent them. Lou and Joan castrated Carlton, who ended up bleeding to death, and Joan ended up taking the blame and was sent to the slot. Boomer received the good news that she has won her appeal and has received her parole, and Frankie asked Boomer to come and live with her and Bridget. When Will told Frankie that Boomer can be released in the morning, Boomer ended up being pushed down the stairs by Craven when Boomer tried to help Lou. Boomer was rushed to hospital with Frankie and Artie, and Will wanted Craven out of the prison and called in the minister. Margot returned to Wentworth in a wheelchair and overheard Ali and Sandy talking and discovered that Sandy is Will's daughter, and she ran off and told Craven about it in return for some protection. Craven then took Sandy to a secluded area and stabbed her in the stomach 4 times. And it was Will who ended up finding her lying in the corridor in a pool of blood, where Sandy tells Will that it was Craven who stabbed her. And Lou Kelly went to see the nurse, telling the nurse that she thinks she might be pregnant. An ambulance arrives at Wentworth for Sandy, and as Sandy is wheeled into the ambulance, Will tells the officers and the minister that he is going with her. The minister says, "What are you doing, Mr. Jackson? I'm here to have a special meeting with you and Mr. Craven." And Will says, "Sorry, minister, I'm going with Edwards. I'll deal with Craven later." Will then jumps into the ambulance with Sandy. At the hospital, Boomer is still crying out in pain. The doctor is checking her over while Frankie and Artie hold Boomer's hands from either side. "It will be okay, Booms," says Frankie, "just hold on." The doctor then tells Boomer that they are gonna have to rush it in for an emergency cesarean. And Boomer says, "What does that mean?" And the doctor says, "It means you're gonna have to have the twins early." And Boomer cries out, No, it's too soon." And the doctor says, "Look, we have to do this, otherwise there's a risk that you or the babies could die. Please don't panic." And Boomer continues to cry while Frankie and Artie try to comfort her. Back at Wentworth, and the news is spreading about what Craven has done to Boomer and Sandy. Rita is running around the prison looking for the missing gun. Maxine asks her, "What's wrong?" And Rita says, "Nothing, Maxie, I'm just looking for something very important." And Maxine says, "You can trust me, Rita, what is it?" And Rita says, "Okay, don't spread this around because I do not want to cause a panic or another lockdown. But me and Sandy had a gun brought in this morning, a loaded gun, and it's gone missing." Maxine says, "Fuck, what are we gonna do?" And Rita says, "I'm gonna find it. That gun is for Craven and nobody else." And Maxine says, "What if it's Craven that's got it?" And Rita says, "Well, I'm fucked. We're all fucked if Craven's got it. All I know is that my gang on the outside are gonna teach Craven a lesson this evening. Then he's gonna come to this prison and he's gonna be coming for me. And I need to be prepared." And Maxine says, "Okay, Rita, let's not panic. I'll help you find the gun." The minister meets Craven in the corridor, and the minister says, "Craven, I'd like you to be in charge for the remainder of today. Mr. Jackson has taken it upon himself to go to the hospital with Edwards." And Craven says, "Yeah, I heard what happened to Edwards. I hope she'll be okay. Well, I'll be happy to take the realms until Mr. Jackson gets back." And the minister says, "Thank you, Craven. If I had it my way, you would be in charge permanently, but sit tight. I'm sure Mr. Jackson could be on his way out if we play our cards right." The minister then walks off and Craven has a big smile on his face. Lou is in the infirmary and the nurse confirms that she is indeed pregnant. Lou has a sad look on her face and begins to hold back the tears. The nurse asks her, "How did this happen? Did it happen while you were on the run?" And Lou says, I don't know, it must have done. Look, can I go back to my unit now? And the nurse says, yeah, of course, but you do know I am gonna have to report this to the governor. And Lou says, do whatever you have to, I don't care. And Lou then heads back to H6. As she's walking down the corridor, she bumps into Craven. And Craven says, ah, Kelly, it's a shame that Boomer interrupted us earlier. Don't worry, I'm sure we can pick up where we left off sooner or later. And Lou says, if anything happens to those babies, Craven, the women in here will tear you apart from limb. And Craven says, not a chance, Kelly. Now fuck off back to your unit. I'll see you later. Craven then walks off. Sandy arrives at the hospital with Will, and Sandy is wheeled down to emergency. Will asks the doctors if she's gonna be okay, and they tell him that they will do everything that they can. Boomer is about to be put under anesthetic, and Frankie tells Boomer, you'll be fine, Booms, I promise, and when you wake up, they will be here. And Boomer says, please let them be okay, and Frankie says, look, shush now, it's gonna be okay. Frankie then gives Boomer a kiss on the forehead, and then Boomer is taken away for the cesarean. Back at Wentworth, and the women are in the dining room having tea. Chrissy returns from the sickbay after her psych session, and Maxine asks if she's okay, and Chrissy says, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just going to be spending the rest of my life in this shit pit. Rita then tells Chrissy to grab her food and to join them at the table, and as they are all eating, Craven walks in, and everyone goes silent. Craven walks around the dining room and says, so, ladies, I've been hearing rumours. Apparently, Connors here has been planning something against me. Is that right, Connors? And Rita says, I've no idea what you're talking about, Craven. It's news to me, isn't that right, girls? And the girls say, that's right, and Craven tells them all to shut up. Rita then says, where did you hear these rumours, Mr. Craven? And Craven says, oh, I got told by Gaffney sitting over there. She tells me that you've all got something nasty planned for me. Oh, she also told me that Edwards and Jackson are related, father and daughter. Now isn't that cozy? The women all have shocked faces, and they all look over at Margot, and Margot starts to panic. Ali is angry and shouts out, you fucking lagger, Gaffney. Margot quickly wheels herself out of the dining room as the women all hurl insults at her. Craven then tells them all to shut it once again, and tells everyone, right ladies, I'm leaving the prison now, but I will be back later tonight. You know how much I love the night shift. The minister has left me in charge while Jackson is away, so it's gonna be a fun night. I'll see you all later. Craven then leaves the dining room while all the women start to whisper among themselves. Rita and Maxine look at each other in panic because they still haven't found the gun. Ali says, fucking Margot, she's gone too far this time. She needs taken down. Craven takes a walk over to the slot before leaving the prison to see Joe. He walks up to the door and looks through the window and says, Ferguson, I didn't want to leave before saying goodbye. And Jones says, had enough, have you, Craven? And Craven says, oh no, Joe, I'm just getting started. I'm in charge now and I'll be back tonight to see you personally. And Jones says, I look forward to it. I'll put on my favourite gloves just for you. Craven then laughs and then walks out of the slot and leaves the prison and heads home. As he's driving home, a man on a motorbike follows him. The women all finish their food and are taken back to their units. Maxine says to Rita, what are we gonna do? Can't you call off your bikie mates and tell them to do it once we found the gun? And Rita says, I can't. The mobile phone is dead and they're not on my call list. Tonight is the night. Gun or no gun, Craven is finally going to get his. We cut back to the hospital and Bridget arrives to see if Boomer is okay, and she finds Frankie in the corridor. Frankie tells Bridget that Boomer is having a cesarean right now, and Bridget says, do you think the babies are going to be okay? And Frankie says, I don't know, Gidge, I just don't know. We then cut to the operating room where the doctors are working on Boomer. We then cut to a dream sequence that Boomer is currently having, and she ends up opening her eyes and all she sees is pure bright lights all around her, and she's still laying down on the operating table. She looks over and she sees 3 women in white robes looking down at her babies. They then turn around and it's Liz, B and Kaz. They then come up to Boomer and they say, "Oh Booms, you've got 2 beautiful girls." Boomer looks completely confused and spun out by what's happening, and B says, "I'm so proud of you, Boomer," while Liz strokes Boomer's head. Kaz then says, "I don't hold it against you, Booms, that you didn't want to name any of them after me." Boomer then does a nervous giggle. Liz then looks down at Boomer and says, "You're gonna be okay, Boomer. You're all gonna be okay." Boomer then smiles, and then Liz smiles back down at her. Boomer then closes her eyes, and when she reopens them, she sees Frankie and Bridget and Artie standing over her. Boomer has woken up and she's a little bit groggy, and she says, "Is this real?" And Frankie says, "Booms, they are here. You've got 2 beautiful baby girls." Boomer then realizes that she has actually come around from the anesthetic and it's all over. Boomer then says, "Where are they?" And Frankie says, "Don't panic, because they've come early, they have to be kept warm in a special unit, but as soon as you're able to, we'll go down and see them." Boomer then says, "There's nothing wrong with them, is there?" And Frankie says, "No, Booms, they are absolutely perfect." Over in the emergency part of the hospital, Will is nervously waiting for some news on Sandy and is pacing the corridor. The doctor comes out with some news. "How is she, doctor?" says Will, and the doctor says, "Well, we've managed to stop the bleeding, but we did have a few worrying moments there. We've done all we can for her now. The next 24 hours are going to be critical. I would notify her next of kin just in case." And Will says, "Thank you, doctor. Can I see her?" And the doctor says, "Only for a few minutes." The doctor then takes Will to see Sandy, who is wired up to a load of machines. Will walks over to the side of a bed and starts to cry. He bends down and whispers into her ear, "Please come back to me, Sandy, you can fight this." Will cannot contain his emotions and tears. He then gives Sandy a kiss on the head and says, "I love you." He then storms out to the hospital with a very angry look on his face. Back in Wentworth, and it's nearly time for lights out, and the girls in H1 talk about Craven. Rita tells the girls to be prepared for what's about to happen tonight and tells them all to leave Craven to her. Ali says, "We can't just hide away in our cells and do nothing." And Rita says, "Thanks, Ali. I know you all mean well and I appreciate it, but I'm doing this for Ruby and for all of you. Craven is mine. The moment he pulled that trigger, he signed his own death warrant. Feel free to come out and watch him take his final breath, but leave him to me." And Chrissy says, I can't wait for you to finish him, Rita. Make him suffer." Lou is alone in her cell, laying down on her bed, and the lights go out. She's rubbing her stomach and is deep in thought and then nods off to sleep. Lou then has her own dream sequence. She's sitting on a wall just by the beach and the wind is blowing through her hair on a hot sunny day. She hears a voice say her name from just behind her. "Lou? Lou? It's me, Lou." Lou then turns around and it's Reb. Reb comes running down towards Lou and into Lou's arms, and Lou says, "Oh my god, I've missed you." And Lou gives Reb a big kiss. Reb looks up at Lou and says, "I'm always with you, Lou, always." And Lou says, "But I want to be able to hold you every day and every night. I miss you so much." Reb then puts his hands onto Lou's stomach and says, "I'm here, Lou. I'm a part of you now. This is your reason now to keep going." A strong gust of wind then blows right through them both, and Reb then disappears, and Lou then suddenly wakes up from her dream with a big deep breath as she sits up. She then looks down at her stomach in a little bit of a panic, but she then lies back down and takes great comfort from this dream that she's just had. Lou then rubs her stomach once again and says, it's okay, Reb. Everything's gonna be okay from now on." We then cut back to the hospital and Boomer is taken down to meet her babies for the first time along with Artie, Frankie and Bridget. Boomer sees her two beautiful babies sleeping in the Humini crib and has happy tears. The babies are doing fine and they're gonna be okay. Artie says to Boomer, "I'm so proud of you, Boomer, and I know Mum will be looking down on you right now." Boomer looks at Artie when she remembers the weird dream that she has and she says, Yeah, she really is. Artie then says, "You're only gonna have me as your chaperone until tomorrow. After that, you're gonna be a free woman." And Boomer says, "But I can still go back and say goodbye to the girls, can't I?" And Artie says, "Of course, Boomer, you need to go and get your things anyway, and we need to sign you out before you leave us. But please promise me you'll stay in touch." And Boomer says, "Oh, I will, I promise." Will arrives back at the prison and goes straight to his office, shaking with anger from what Sandy told him. He pours himself a whiskey and sits in his governor's chair in the dark, pondering his dark and angry thoughts. We then cut to Craven in his house. Craven is putting his jacket on and watching himself in the mirror with his dark and soulless eyes before putting back on his glasses. All of a sudden, Rita's bikie gang, the Conquerors, burst through Craven's front door and back door, all armed with weapons. One of them wraps a large chain around Craven's neck and pulls him to the floor. Craven tries to fight, but three other bikies sit on top of him and hold him down. Craven says, "What the fuck do you want?" And one of them says, "This is a present from Rita Connors and Ruby Mitchell." The bikie gang then starts smashing up Craven's house all around him, literally tearing everything apart, ripping things off the wall and smashing everything. They then drag Craven out of the house and into the front garden, and they hold him down while the rest of them start pouring gasoline all around his house. One of the gang members then throws a match, igniting Craven's house into a huge ball of flames. They let Craven go and they all then jump back onto their bikes and they all drive off cheering as they leave the house in a ball of flames. Craven gets onto his feet and looks at his house burning down in front of his eyes and screams out, "Connors!" The camera pans into the flames and then fades to the prison car park, where Craven arrives. He looks at the prison looking really angry and looking like a wild animal. He goes into reception where he sees one of the night staff and says, "Radio through to all officers immediately and get them all down here." The night staff worker says, What do you want about? What do you want about, Craven?" And Craven says, "You heard me. I'm in charge of this prison. Get them all down here now." The officer then radios through for all staff to come down to reception, and Will is in his office and hears the call and is wondering what's happening. All of the night staff officers get down to reception and Will watches what's happening from around the corner. Craven tells them all to hand in their keys and leave the prison. One of the officers says, "Who's gonna look after the prisoners?" And Craven says, "Me! Now get the fuck out of this prison." The officers all look at each other in confusion and shock, but they all hand in their keys and leave through reception. Craven then closes and locks the doors, not realizing that Will is watching from around the corner. Craven then goes to walk up the corridor towards the units, but Will goes up behind Craven and whacks him over the back of the head and knocks him out cold. Will then drags him to the governor's office and locks the door. He then grabs a bottle of whiskey and pours it over Craven's face, saying, "Wakey wakey, Craven." Craven looks up and sees Will. He then quickly gets up and tries to make a run for it, but the door is locked. Will then shakes the keys in his hand and says, "You're not going anywhere, Craven. It's just me and you." Craven says, "What's going on, Jackson?" And Will says, "I want to know why you tried to kill my daughter." Craven then laughs and nods and says, "I did it to piss you off, Jackson. Just show you who the real boss is of this prison." Will starts to get real angry and says, "So you literally did it to fuck me off?" And Craven nods his head and says, "Yeah, it was real easy too." Will then loses it and charges at Craven, and the pair of them slam against the door. Will starts throwing gut punches at Craven, and Craven then fights back. and the pair of them end up on the floor, punching and grappling and rolling around the office and trying to beat the crap out of each other. Will gets on top of Craven and starts to choke him with his hand, and Craven then puts his hand around Will's throat, and the pair of them are trying to choke each other out, but Will starts to lose his breath and pulls back. Craven then gets back onto his feet and then kicks Will in the guts. He then proceeds to punch him to the ground, and as Will is on the floor, Craven starts kicking Will over and over again, not giving him a chance to get back up. But Will manages to roll just as Craven goes to kick him again and manages to get back up. Will then charges at Craven and rugby tackles him onto the governor's table, and they both end up breaking through the table and the punches keep getting thrown. Will then gets a piece of broken wood and presses it down onto Craven's face, telling him that he's going to kill him. And Craven says, "In your dreams, Jackson." Craven then manages to push Will off him, and Craven then runs at Will and body slams him into the wall. Will then falls to the ground as he is completely winded. Craven then kicks Will in the face while he's on the floor, flipping Will onto his back. Craven then says, "Did you really think you'd be able to beat me, Jackson? You're nothing but a pathetic little boy, and your daughter is nothing but a scummy little cunt." Will then grabs Craven's leg and gets him back onto the ground, and Will climbs on top of him, starts to punch him in the face, and Craven's trying to fight back. The pair of them end up rolling around on the floor in the governor's office, and the floor is literally turning into a bloodbath. Craven then punches Will in the throat, causing Will to choke. Will stumbles back up onto his feet right by the governor's window. Craven then runs at Will and body slams him through the window, and Will goes flying out of the first floor window as it smashes, and he lands down onto the grassy, gravelly ground at the bottom. Craven looks out of the broken window and sees Will lying motionless on the ground. Craven then says to himself, "One down, a dozen to go." Craven then wipes the blood from his face and unlocks the door. He then heads down to the slot where Joan is being kept. He unlocks the gate and walks up to Joan's door, where Joan is standing at the far wall, and Joan says, "Hello, Craven, come on in." Craven then unlocks the door slowly and opens it and steps in. Joan steps forward and says, "So, how are we going to do this?" Craven just stares at Joan with his cold eyes, looking like a demented wild animal. Joan then lifts up her arms and lunges at Craven, digging both of her hands and nails into his neck and pushes him into the corner of the wall. Craven then grabs Joan by the hair and starts pulling very hard, to the point where he starts literally pulling her hair out. But Joan will not stop digging at Craven's throat and is literally starting to cut into his throat with her nails. But Craven keeps on ripping Joan's hair out until one of them gives in, but Joan is not giving up. Craven then headbutts Joan and pushes her off him. Craven then runs at Joan and body slams her into the other side of the wall, and Craven has her pinned up against this wall as Joan tries to get her breath back. Joan then grabs Craven's neck and tries to twist and break it, but Craven just throws Joan to the ground and starts kicking her on the floor over and over again, in the back and in the guts. He then kicks her in the face and Joan is knocked out while lying down on her back. Craven then walks over to Joan and says, "You fucking freak." He then lifts up his foot and violently stamps on Joan's face, completely bursting open her nose and blood flies everywhere. Craven then walks out of the cell as Joan lies motionless on the floor. Craven then leaves the slot and heads down to the kitchen, where he picks up the biggest kitchen knife that he can find. He then heads down to H6 where Lou Kelly is sleeping. Once again, Craven slowly opens the gates and goes to Lou's door. He looks in and sees that she is fast asleep on her bed. He then opens the door and goes in with the large kitchen knife. He stands next to her bedside and watches her sleep. He then plunges the knife into Lou's right shoulder, and Lou wakes up screaming. Craven pulls out the knife and tells Lou to get the fuck up, she's coming with him. And Lou says, "What the fuck are you doing?" And Craven shouts out, "Get up! On your feet now!" as Craven continues to wave this big knife at Lou. Lou then gets up and walks in front of Craven, and Craven tells her to keep moving. He takes Lou to H1 and he gives Lou the keys to open the gate, which Lou does. As the gate opens, this alerts everyone in H1 and they all come out of their cells. Rita sees what's happening as Lou walks into the H1 unit, and Craven shouts out, "Wakey wakey girls, get up, now, out of your cells and down the back of the unit." Lou, Rita, Chrissy, Maxine and Ali all go down to the back of the unit as Craven waves his knife at them. Rita says, "It's me you want, Craven, why don't you pick on me?" And Craven says, "Don't worry Connors, you're gonna get yours, don't you worry, all of you are." Craven then says, "Latham, come here." And Chrissy panics and says, "Why?" And Craven shouts out, "Come here now." Chrissy walks towards Craven slowly and Rita says, "You better not hurt her, Craven." And Craven tells Rita to shut the fuck up. He then grabs Chrissy and says, "You're coming with me," and drags Chrissy out of the unit and locks the gates. Rita then runs at the gate and says to Craven to let her go, and Craven says, "If anyone tries anything while I'm gone, I'm going to slit Latham's throat." Craven then takes a frightened Chrissy down the hallway and into H4 where Margot Gaffney is, and Craven says, "Get out here now, Gaffney." Margot then comes out of her cell in her wheelchair and says, "What's going on?" And Craven says, "You're coming with me. Now Latham, push Gaffney down to H1. So Chrissy takes Margot down to H1 in the wheelchair as Craven walks behind them with the knife. Margot whispers to Chrissy, "What the fuck is going on?" Craven shouts out, "Cut out the whispering." As they get back to H1, Rita is at the gate and Craven tells her to get to the back of the unit with the others. Craven then unlocks the gate and Chrissy takes this opportunity to try and overpower him, but Craven just plunges the kitchen knife straight into Chrissy's stomach in front of the horrified women. And Craven then throws Chrissy into H1 on the floor. Maxine and Rita run to check on her. Margot is in her wheelchair by the gates and says, "What are you doing, Craven? Have you completely lost it?" And Craven says, "Oh yes, I've lost it, Gaffney." Craven then grabs a can of gasoline from around the corner and starts pouring it into H1. He throws some of it onto Chrissy as she's on the floor and Rita and Maxine drag her back. "You're fucking crazy," shouts Ali as Craven continues to throw more and more gasoline into the unit. He then chucks the rest of the gasoline can at the women. He then stands back at the gates with Margot. Rita says, "You're never gonna get away with this, Craven. It's me you want. Why don't you pick on me? Are you too chicken to face me, Craven?" And Craven says, "Oh no, Connors, I'm no chicken. Just ask Mr. Jackson and Ferguson." And Rita's face drops and she says, "Don't tell me that you've killed them." And Craven says, "Well, if I have, you can say hello to them again in just a few moments." Craven then pulls out some matches and gives them to Margot. "This is your chance, Gaffney," says Craven. "This is your chance to get your own back on the women who broke your legs." Margot looks in at the women with a shocked face as Rita, Lou and the girls look back. Rita says, "Don't do it, Margot." And Craven says, "If you don't do it, Gaffney, I'm gonna stick you in there with them and you're going to burn alive." Margot looks back at the women and then looks down at the matches in her hand. She then looks back up at the women once again and says, "I've got no choice, girls. I'm gonna have to do it." Lou shouts out, "You double fucking crossing cunt, Gaffney." And Rita says, "Don't do his dirty work, Margot." And Margot says, "I'm sorry. As you can see, girls, I've got no choice." And Craven has a smirk on his face and says, "Light up the match, Gaffney, and throw it into the unit." Margot then takes a match out of the box and her hands are shaking. Margot takes one last look up at the women in the unit and says, "I'm so sorry, girls." Margot then gets ready to light the match. But then all of a sudden, an injured Joan Ferguson pops up behind Craven and wraps some wire around his neck and pulls him down. Margot then stops what she's doing. As Joan pulls Craven down onto the floor with the wire around his neck, Craven drops his knife. Rita then runs to the gate and grabs the knife, but Craven elbows Joan and manages to break free and knocks Margot out of her wheelchair. Rita then plunges the knife into Craven's side and Craven then lifts up his leg and kicks Rita in the crotch, causing Rita to fall back. Joan then jumps on Craven from behind, but Craven spins around and slams Joan into the wall, and then throws her onto the floor. Now as Joan is on the floor, Craven then stamps on her leg, causing Joan's leg to break and snap with the bone sticking out, and Joan screams out in pain. Rita then runs at Craven with the knife, but Craven runs down the corridor and Rita chases him. Maxine is cradling a seriously injured Chrissy on the ground, and Ali wheels her chair over to an injured Joan who's still on the floor in pain. Ali takes some great delight watching her old enemy crying out in pain on the floor and just sits there and watches. Margot tries to crawl away on the floor, but Lou walks over and grabs her, punches her in the face and calls her a dog, before dragging her into the unit and into one of the cells. Maxine then looks up at Lou and says, "Lou, you need to go and help Rita, now. She can't beat that monster on her own." And Lou says, "I can't." And Ali turns around and says, "You have to, Lou. I can't do fuck all and Maxine's arm is broken. You have to help Rita." Lou then shouts out, "I fucking can't because I'm pregnant, okay? I'm fucking pregnant. I can't risk hurting the baby." And Ali has a shocked look on her face. Ferguson then crawls over to Ali's wheelchair and grabs her leg. "Ali, give me your chair," says Joan. "Give me your chair and I will help Rita." Ali looks down at Joan and says, "What the fuck are you gonna be able to do?" And Joan says, "Please Ali, I've never asked you for anything, but if you want me to help Rita, give me your chair." Rita is running through the prison with the knife looking for Craven, but he's nowhere to be seen. Rita notices the door to the yard has been left open, and Rita slowly goes out looking for Craven in the shadows with an eerie sound of silence. She's walking around the open yard and can't see him anywhere. All of a sudden, Craven comes running out from behind one of the sheds, and as Rita turns around, Craven slices her arm with another knife that he has just picked up. But Rita manages to jump back just in time. Craven and Rita then start to circle each other in the yard, both armed with large kitchen knives. Craven says, "So, the time has finally come, Connors." And Rita says, "That's right, Craven. Have you ever wondered how it feels? A knife slipping between your ribs and up into your heart." And Craven says, "Not if I get to you first, Connors." And they continue to circle each other like wild animals. Meanwhile, Joan is wheeling herself down the halls of Wentworth in Ali's wheelchair, in absolute agony with her broken leg, but she is determined to get to Craven. Back in the yard, and Rita and Craven continue to circle each other. Craven then says, "What's the matter, Connors? Aren't you gonna have a stab? Your precious Ruby would be so disappointed with you." Rita starts to get even more angry and almost starts to growl. Craven then says, "Come on, Connors, why are we still dancing?" Rita then lunges the knife towards Craven but misses as Craven steps back. Craven then goes in for a slice and misses Rita by inches. Rita then lifts up her leg and kicks Craven in the chest, causing Craven to fall back against the fence. Rita then lunges the knife at Craven's face and the knife goes straight through his cheek. Craven screams out and then lunges his knife into Rita's hip. Rita then pulls out the knife from Craven's face and plunges it into his stomach, and Craven then drops his knife. He then headbutts Rita while the knife is still in his stomach, causing Rita to fall back onto the floor. He then pulls out the knife from his stomach and dives on top of Rita. Joan then gets to the doorway to the yard and hears the commotion. An injured Craven is on top of Rita and slicing her all over as Rita struggles back. Rita then goes to punch Craven, but the knife goes through her knuckles and gets stuck in her hand, and Rita then screams out in huge pain. She then pulls out the knife from her hand and throws it. They then wrestle around on the grass. The pair of them are both injured, but the punches keep on flying. An injured Joan wheels herself into the yard and waits for her moment. Rita is on top of Craven and is punching him in the face over and over again, but Craven manages to grab a rock from beside him and smashes it into Rita's face, causing Rita to roll off Craven. Craven then gets on top of Rita and smashes the rock into her face again. Joan then wheels herself onto the grass, and just as Craven is about to smash the rock into Rita's face again, Joan dives off the wheelchair and onto Craven's back, putting him in a headlock with one arm and trying to grab the rock with her other arm. Craven then rolls backwards and on top of Joan as Joan tries to lock him in, but because Joan has got a broken leg, she just cannot hold him. Craven then manages to get hold of one of the knives, and as he and Joan are both on the ground, Craven lunges a knife into Joan's chest. Joan takes a painful deep breath as the knife remains in her chest. Joan then lies on her back on the grass and isn't able to do any more. Craven then gets up and sees Rita trying to crawl away, but Craven kicks Rita, which causes her to flip onto her back. Craven then sits on top of Rita and she tries to put her hands around his throat, but Craven picks up the rock once again and smashes it into her face, and this time Rita's arms drop. Craven then lifts up the rock and smashes it into her face again, and Rita is barely alive at this stage. He then lifts up the rock once more, and as he goes to smash it into Rita's face, Will Jackson pops up behind him and has hold of the other knife, and he ends up slicing Craven's throat from behind from ear to ear, causing all of the blood to burst out all over a very injured Rita. Craven tries to get back onto his feet as his throat is ripped open, but Will grabs him and gets the knife and continues to slice it into Craven's throat over and over again, and Will screams out, "You fucking monster!" and Will is coming very close to decapitating Craven's head. Rita looks up in disbelief at what she's seeing. Will then lets Craven go and drops the knife, and he then falls to the grass. Will then crawls up to Rita. He tries to get his breath back and says, "Rita, are you okay?" And Rita says, "I'm okay, check on Ferguson." Will then crawls over to Joan, who is still alive, but the knife is still in her chest. Will says, "Ferguson, stay with me, Ferguson." Joan then looks at Will and says, "Do me one favour, Mr. Jackson. Tell the police it was me. It was me who killed Craven. Tell them it was me, blame me, and save yourself. It's what Vera would have wanted." Joan then makes an almighty roar and then rips the knife out from her chest, and she lets out one final scream. The blood oozes from her chest and Joan stares up at the sky. Will cannot believe what is happening right in front of him, and as the camera pans down onto Joan's face, Joan takes her final breath. Joan has gone, and the camera fades to black as we hear police sirens heading towards Wentworth. The monster is finally dead. The monster who killed my sister. The monster who destroyed everything that he touched. It was the only thing that was keeping me going. Now I can finally have the chance to grieve, and Ruby can finally rest in peace. Who would have thought that it would have been Joan Ferguson who would have saved us all from being burnt alive, Ali's worst enemy, but when push came to shove, they worked together to take out an even bigger monster. The police came and we all told the same story. Craven went mad and tried to kill us all, and Joan and Craven ended up killing each other in a bloody battle in the yard. Mr. Jackson made sure the CCTV was all deleted and we blamed it all on Craven. Chrissy survived the stabbing and made a full recovery. Sandy too. She finally opened her eyes and saw her dad looking back at her. Mr. Jackson recovered and the minister lost his job after the Craven incident, but I owe Mr. Jackson for everything. The one thing I can't get my head around is the change in Lou since the pregnancy bombshell. It's like she's another person. She told us all she's gonna name the baby after Reb. Maybe now Lou can start turning over a new leaf. Although, heaven help anyone who ever tries to harm her baby. Boomer came back to the prison to say her goodbyes and promised us that she will bring baby B and baby Liz in for a visit when they are strong enough. A happy ending for a beautiful soul. And for me, well, One of the last things that Ruby made me promise is to look after the women, and that is a promise that I am going to fulfill from now on. But wait, what about the missing gun? We then cut to H4, in Margot Gaffney's cell. Margot is lying dead on the floor, and who is holding the gun? Ali Novak. And Ali says, "Rule number 1, never fuck with the red right hand."
I see the fear in